This morning, I'm really excited to start off with this conversation about conversations in the digital world. We've been having a lot of different things happening in our KM world, and you know, it's the organizational culture that is created by conversations. And with what's been happening, it's not been so easy for us to do, to connect with people who are working remotely or globally or, you know, not in a physical building as we used to in the past. So our speakers today are going to have a conversation about that, and I think you'll be inspired by them. Sandra Montanino is a longtime, for me, KM friend who is the founder and principal of Navigate, and she was formerly the director of professional development at a large Toronto law firm, and it was a conversation with her which started the idea of this keynote discussion. So I think you'll be engaged by it. Sandra has a law degree as well as a business degree, and her company is focused on helping people develop the skills necessary to navigate the workplace for professional success. She founded Navigate with the purpose of infusing fundamental principles into all professional skills training: curiosity, awareness, intention, inclusion and belonging, purpose, empowerment, communication, and wellness. I had to get them all in there. She's driven by a desire to help others decode workplace norms, expectations, and structures to more equitable, inclusive, and supportive work environments. Now, Kim Glover is the Director of Internal Communications Global at Technip FMC, and she has been a longtime KM World friend, mentor, workshop leader, speaker, and always has fantastic ideas and insights, and really inspires a lot of people. She has several decades of experience in communications, marketing, project management, digital engagement, change management, and knowledge management. She's the winner of the KM World 2017 Reality Award. And speaking of awards, our awards this year will be presented tomorrow over lunch. So hopefully you will be there to see the interesting people who are winning awards at KM World this year. Kim has led the Knowledge Management Initiative at FMC Technologies, a winner of multi-MAKE awards, both global and American categories. And prior to that, she was with the KM office at Aspen Technology, who were in the most valuable intranet of 2012. So you know that she is an award-winning person. So just know that she has lots to contribute. So I'm going to stop now and ask them to have a conversation around conversations. Take it away, ladies.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Jane. We know what an effort it is to bring all of these people together in this conference together, so we appreciate you as well, Jane, and your team that puts all of this learning together for us. We're very, very pleased to be with all of you here today, and as Jane said, this all started with the conversation. So thank you all for engaging in the poll. We decided that it seemed odd to have a keynote about conversations with one person up here telling you about it. So Kim and I decided that it's better to have a conversation about conversations to demonstrate our point. And we'd like to engage all of you in our conversation as well. So you'll see throughout, we're going to put some prompts up on the board behind us, and we encourage you, if you've answered this first one, it'll just update on your phone, and we encourage you to give us your thoughts and insights, and we'll try to do our best to respond to some of those and include them in our conversation. So with that, the first prompt is, why are you here? What is it about this topic that's interesting to you, or that there's something of importance here? And while you start to think about that and put some answers up, I'll share a little bit more color on the conversation that Jane and I had, which was that we felt the future of work was being very narrowly discussed in terms of where we were going to work, as opposed to how we were going to work going forward. And while it was very easy to blame that on COVID and say, well, COVID stripped us of all these opportunities and thrust us into the work from home environment, and that's why, you know, it's difficult now to converse and have conversations and connection. I noted to Jane that I was noticing that trend way before COVID. We had lawyers in our firm who were sending long strings of emails back and forth as opposed to walking down the hall and talking to the person. There's a stat, I think, that for every 3 emails sent, 2 of them are following up on the previous one. So there was a real need to maybe cut through some of that noise, as well as the obvious human connection that is so important in terms of preserving our conversations. So Jane immediately thought of Kim for this. And you can see why from the introduction. She has so much to offer. So in the post-COVID world, we may have a different situation than we had going into COVID, maybe a little extra friction. Sometimes we're texting people before we decide to call, texting people before we decide to drop in. And so we thought today would be a really good day to talk about the importance of preserving conversation. We're not anti-tech.
No, no.
We are very pro-tech,
Yes.
but we're pro-leveraging tech.
Pro-leveraging tech for the human experience and the connection and the serendipity.
Yes. So thank you all for voting. Now you're all challenging me because I've got like these things now that I have to, because now that we've got so many answers that they're looking a little bit small for me on the screen.
The biggest one is learn, Sandra. And
Yeah.
I loved one that I saw come in, humans first, connection, discovering, networking, and sharing. These are all words that we already knew.
Yeah.
Right?
And interestingly, when you think about conversations, for me, that's at the heart of learning and sharing and
Yes.
knowledge management. I mean, that's the original way that we share our stories, share our narratives, and share lived experience with each
Yes.
other. It's what is innately human.
Absolutely. And connection is critically important. Nancy Dixon wrote about connect before content back in 2009. And she made the point that if you want me to share my knowledge, I really need to have a relationship with you. There needs to be trust.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into it a little bit more by talking about really what are we talking about when we say conversations. I mean, we're all together a lot of the time. Some people have started heading back to the office, whether it's hybrid or whether they're co-located with some of their colleagues. And so we have lots of interactions, but how would you define conversations? What makes a good conversation?
Listening, knowing that that other person is engaged with you in the moment, and a sense of reciprocity, right? My former boss, who's from Norway, and I spoke about enterprise dialogue a few years ago. And he introduced us, because he spoke about it at this conference, to a term in Norway, tur-talking. And tur-talking is translated literally as turn-taking. So there is that reciprocity in a conversation. That's what it is for me.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because the synchronicity of conversation, I think, is important. And it can be uncomfortable for people. So I think we mistake sometimes that when something is easier to do through technology, for example, send a text, to break up with someone. You know, maybe easier for you, but it's not necessarily better. And I would argue even in those sort of more challenging conversations or difficult situations, it's not better for the person in receipt of the message, but it's also really having an impact on the people who are not necessarily processing and feeling the depth of that emotion for themselves. So we're sort of skimming along the emotional surface of some of these things instead of engaging in some of the difficult conversations that would really advance the other person and would also advance us.
Yes, and I'm just experiencing the distraction of technology in this moment. I noticed while you were talking that you got a bunch of hearts when you were talking about breaking up with someone by text. And so I'm actually living what you're talking about. I'm kind of having an out-of-body experience here, sort of this conversation about tech, leveraging humanity in conversations. But the emojis and the hearts can also be helpful, right?
Yeah.
They can augment. It's just how do we do it with intentionality?
Mm-hmm. And I think I'm very cautiously optimistic when we talk about generative AI and new technologies that are coming in, because I think we can actually leverage them to have better conversations.
Absolutely.
In some ways. You know, I heard one of the Microsoft people talking about Copilot and how it can teach you about how you're having conversations. You know, who was speaking the most in that conversation? Who got interrupted? Who maybe made comments that were, you know, biased or discriminatory in the conversation? So it can actually provide us with some data to have better conversations. I guess we're at a little bit of a crux, though, in that we've historically been talking through text, now we're talking to tech. And that's a little bit different than having a human on the other side of the communication. So I think we're at a point of really deciding how to show up intentionally at work and creating new workplaces that embrace these technologies to be able to help us, but really bring us back to being human and leveraging what we're good at as humans.
Yes, I was looking up quotes for one of the other presentations about technology, and I forget who said it, but it was so profound and simple. The best technology is just one that enables things for humans. And that's what it's for, right? Technology is first, last, and always about making our lives better or easier in some way.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely agree. And I'm looking at some of the things here, the give and take of conversation, interacting with others, the exchange, respectful dialogue, engaging in meaningful ways with goals. I mean, I think we have so many answers that they're below the screen here. But all of these things can be done asynchronously. You know, you can have an exchange of ideas, you can create community online. So I think what we're saying makes the exchange in real time a little bit different is that you engage a whole different system of reading the cues. So I had a conversation with ChatGPT about this, just to test it out a little bit before this keynote. And Chat, because we're on a first name basis now, Chat, I said to Chat, you know, what are we doing here? Are we having a conversation? And it said, yes. You know, we're meeting some of these elements of a conversation. We're having an exchange. We're going back and forth. We're interacting with each other. So I said, well, no offense, Chat, but, you know, I don't get the same feeling from this as when I talk to a person. So what makes our conversation that we're having different than if I were talking with Kim or with you or with you? And Chat said, no offense taken. Very polite Chat all the time. He said, no offense taken, he or she, no offense taken, but there is certainly a whole other element to talking to another human where we're reading not just the words, we're feeling the message, right? There's nuance to that communication of understanding, seeing the other person as their full self that we don't always see when we read the words that someone's communicating to us. So there's a whole other level of belonging and being valued and heard in a synchronous exchange, but it's risky.
Yes, and another element that is between humans and not between chat and you or chat and me, is that co-creation of meaning that happens
Yes.
when you have a conversation or a dialogue. You're discussing something together and developing something beyond what either of you had before that. And so that co-created new shared understanding becomes a whole. And what chat can't give you is its idea, right? It's giving you the amalgam of many, many other people's idea, which has huge value, right? But it's not interpersonal. Can I comment on listening?
Yes.
I saw listening in our
Yes.
Mentimeter as one of the definitions of conversation. And I mentioned it earlier, but I wanted to dive just a little more deeply into it because listening, I think, is a superpower. Don't you?
I do.
I mean,
I
when
agree.
Sandra and I had our first chat, we told stories, we grew respect for each other, we developed trust. I think we said to each other at the end of the second call, I trust you. And that was so meaningful. But we wouldn't have gotten there if we hadn't had the energy, if we hadn't shown up to listen to each other. And it's just incredibly important. And so I have to remind myself all the time, if I can't have this conversation with this person at this time because I'm really thinking about that next presentation or I'm running to this meeting, I need to be transparent and say, I'm sorry, you don't have my full attention. I've got to go do this thing. Because listening, if it's not there, it's not really a conversation, or else it's just a bad one.
I absolutely agree, and I think you brought up such great points. This kind of thing is something that is difficult to teach because a lot of us think we know it, and a lot of us think we do it, but we don't. And I can see this across, frankly, all generations. This is not a generational thing.
No, not.
This is, people who are doing this while you're talking to them. And that doesn't make you feel seen or heard or respected. But what I loved about what you're saying is that there is that opportunity to co-create new norms on how we do that. So I've heard a lot in the last little while from clients around annoying meetings. Anybody been to an annoying meeting? A waste of time meeting? Okay. So I've been hearing so much about it, but I don't think it's the meeting itself that's broken. It's how we behave in meetings, how we use our time in meetings, how we respect others in meetings. So I think there's an opportunity, as you said, to say, you don't have my full attention, or if we're not going to be here, actually talking and working out problems with each other, then let's figure out another way to do this. So I've seen some companies do things like breaks in meetings. So, you didn't used to have an hour meeting with breaks. But now, to deal with that and address that anxiety of disconnection that people have around not checking their phone every 3 minutes, that some companies have said the new norm is we get together, we talk for 15 minutes, and we give people a break to look at their phones then. Because while you're here, we want you to be here. So presence is not about location. It's about a mindset, a state of how you show up for others and for yourself. And I think if you can get people to tie that to their values of, I want to be a respectful person. That's who I am. I want to include others. I want to make good decisions. And that relies on getting the input from other people. So if you tap into people's value sets and start to think about how do we want to work together? How do we want to show up? And how can we make ultimately better decisions and have better business outcomes?
I want to be fully present in this moment with all of you and with Sandra. I don't even know where my phone is. I don't care. Because this
Mine's
is something...
the remote for the clicker. I'm just going to state that up front. If you think I'm distracted, it's the remote for this thing.
And another really simple thing...
Great use of technology.
Yeah, that's right. And she's doing all the work, by the way. Another really simple and useful thing is just let's be humans at the beginning of a meeting. Let's spend 5 minutes. How are you? What did you do over the weekend? What are you looking forward to? That's the most wonderful open-ended question that elicits the most wonderful, human, powerful responses and creates that connection before collaboration or before content. And that does not have to be in person. It can certainly be digital in all ways.
Yeah. I actually had a situation. I was coaching a number of associates from a firm, and I was the in-between between the partner set that they were working with and then the associates who were working with them. And they were craving that sense of belonging and mentorship that was being promised if they came back to the office, but was not being delivered. by the partnership. And the partners that I was dealing with, I found it so interesting that between them, I had one group that was far on the one side of everybody needs to be here 5 days. That's the way they learn. That's the way you connect. That's the way you, are able to advance your career if you are here 5 days a week. And I had on the other extreme a partner who said, I'm done my career. I've got my network. I can work from the cottage. I don't need to come, down for anyone. Interestingly, when I asked the associates who they got to know, and this was just coming out of COVID, most of them pointed to the cottage partner. The in-person partner was physically at the office, but was often on Zoom calls, door closed, didn't go by their office, no intentionality around how they were showing up. And because they experienced mentorship as part of their foundational, career path, they just assumed that they were good at doing it for others, but weren't necessarily practicing it. The person who was at the cottage had to behave with a different intention. So what he did differently, which is, of course, what I was curious to understand, why did they feel closer to that person than the person who was in the office? And they said because he made a standing meeting every week with the associates he was working with. And he started every meeting, as you said, with a point of connection, asked how they were doing, talked about their workload, what was going well, what was sticky for them in the moment, and how could he help with that. And it's not magic, it's time and intention and investment into that relationship that eventually got to a place where they felt comfortable being able to say things. They felt comfortable asking for opportunities. They felt comfortable admitting when they were out of their depth and maybe needed some help. So, those two partners, I can tell you, the one was convinced he was the one who was doing things right. So I agree that it's not about your location, it's about your intention and your investment. And the training is difficult because it's not about telling people, it's about practice. Practice, practice, practice,
It
practice.
is, and it's about the relationship, because if you don't have the trust and the respect and you don't focus on the relationship, it doesn't matter if you're co-located, if you're digital or hybrid, it doesn't matter if you're on the moon, you're not going to get the value out of the conversations, and you're not going to co-create that meaning together, or the solutions, or whatever it is you're tackling in your conversations.
So Kim demonstrated an excellent example of working alongside tech to create sort of community and knowledge sharing and understanding, but then bringing it into a real live conversation when she sent out X-Leap. Do you want to talk about that? Because I
Yes.
think some of these things are coming up here in our
Yes.
in our responses.
I would love to. We use a facilitated collaboration tool called X-Leap, and actually it won a KM World Award last week. We were so excited for our friends at X-Leap. We don't get any kind of kickback, by the way, but we use it all the time, and it allows for asynchronous collaboration or synchronous. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to use technology to gather input for this particular session from my KM tribe, from my peeps. And so I set up an X-Leap for internal and another one for external, and got about 18 responses on each, and got the most wonderful conversation going asynchronously. Some of you are here in the room. I love you. You gave me great responses. I will share this, by the way. My email's in the thing. I can share it with anyone. And we saw some trends. And then I had my own conversation with ChatGPT and fed it each of the 4 questions, which were about building trust and respect, and how can you be innovative in a hybrid situation. And the questions that are begged by the description of this session that you and Jane wrote. And ChatGPT gave me some nice summaries. They were kind of long at first, so I had to have a little more prompting.
Had to have a chat with Chat.
Yeah, yes. And it, really good summaries. None of it was surprising. But what I noticed when I got it even smaller and shorter is that it didn't have that vibrant, dynamic feel of the raw input in the conversation that we collected in the X-Leap. There was passion, there was emotion, there was pain, there was delight in the raw stuff we heard from you. But X-Leap boiled it down to nice bullets that I could use I don't know, maybe in a proposal to management or something. But it was cool to use technology in that way. And it's also cool to see the difference in what the human created and what the machine created. And they both have value.
Yeah, yeah. And I think something you brought up there around the depth of things. And where I start to worry is that we've trained many, many people to be sort of jet skiers along the surface, that you can go deep when you need to. You don't need to remember this. You don't need to know this. You don't need to sort of internalize or process or think or reference it to your lived experience, because you can always just look at it later if you really need it. And as a result, we sometimes fail to go deep into some of these things. And the medium sometimes can encourage a little bit of that surface stuff as well, right? You can ask it lots of questions and get lots of surface answers, but to go deep, sometimes you need that unpredictable, uncertain exchange with another person. And I think sometimes, again, those back and forth emails that I was talking about at the beginning of the session, people kind of go, I give up, you know? I was reading something about appeal court judges and how there's been a noticeable drop in the depth of analysis in decisions out of the court. And the reason they think is because they no longer get together to have that exchange of ideas and thought and lateral thinking, critical thinking that is really required. When you get to an exchange of 20 emails long, you just kind of go, okay, that's good enough. We'll just leave it at that. And so again, I'm optimistic here that we're entering a whole different realm of technology with generative AI and its ability to go deep. But from all the I'm not an expert in AI, I'll just put that out there. From all the other experts that I've heard, almost everyone universally says the most important skill set to be developing in an age of AI are your human skills, because that is the stuff that won't be replaced. We tell some of the junior lawyers, if you want to sit in your office all day and write emails, there's an app for that now. But if you want to really advance your career, and not be a commodity and not be something that's going to be replaced, you need to start now investing in your human relationships. And to do that requires conversation.
Absolutely. And Sandra and I talked about not wanting to seem anti-tech. We are not. We love tech. Tech rocks. Tech is hot and sexy. However, it's our job as communicators, as knowledge management professionals, to harness tech, again, for the human. So we don't know all the answers yet as a group or individually, right? But can we collectively have that conversation and figure out how to co-create the best ways for us to leverage tech to connect humans, to create those conversations that will help solve the problems for the world? Because that's what we're doing, right? Each of us in our individual jobs, whether you're in healthcare or you're in energy or you're doing important legal things, are about helping harness our world, helping our humans get through our world. So how can we use our human skills with tech? How can we listen and converse and not lose what we know works, that relationship, those listening skills, those connections?
Yeah, and we talked in our prep about, how a lot of what we're talking about, when you say it to people, people get it, they feel it. They've been in a conversation with someone where they know the person's not present, and they know how that feels. So it's not a lack of information, it's perhaps a lack of, or a need for, I won't say a lack of, I'll say a need for bravery and courage in some of these conversations to show up in a way that that models what it is you want from the other person and sets those norms. I mean, I have 4 kids, 3 in university, and the ones in university actually said to us just recently, maybe this would have been a bit easier to meet people if we didn't have our phones. They're noticing it, that it takes a little bit longer because you've cut the time in half that you're spending with people because the other half is on a screen. So it takes that little bit longer. But it's hard to get the courage in an environment where everybody is doing that. So I think it's a time for leaders to really step up.
Yes.
And model how this can be done in workplaces to make sure that we're meaningfully doing it. And business outcomes follow. I mean,
Absolutely.
There's plenty of research to talk about, the more time partners spend with their clients, the bigger their book of business. Not surprising.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The more students go to office hours with professors in person, the better they do on exams and results. None of these things are surprising, but we have to really nudge ourselves out of our comfort zone to do it.
Yes, and I want to pick up on that thread that you tugged on, Sandra. One of the themes that we heard, that we both picked up, we didn't need ChatGPT to tell us, in our X-Leap that we got input from you on, was lead by example. Lead by example. Model the behaviors that you want to see. Turn on your camera if that's your norm. Have courage. Create conversations around difficult topics. Invest trust in each other. Bring up those things that are uncomfortable, but that you really have to share at work if you believe in creating a culture of psychological safety, right? If you can talk about it, but you can't really have it until you demonstrate that you're not going to die from it. If, for instance, you share a personal difficulty at work. And the reasons for having these kinds of conversations at work is because, as you said this morning, we think we're the only one sometimes, but we're never the only one. But the only way to tell that you're not the only one is to share and to get that second one to raise their hand and to create this space where you actually can have those hard conversations, where I can trust Sandra if she gives me some constructive feedback, that she's doing that because she cares about me. She's not doing it to hurt me. She's doing it because she wants me to be better. And you can trust the same from me, right? But we can't get there unless we invest in each other, unless we create that connection and that relationship. I'm getting all passionate.
Well, that's a huge topic around the difficult conversations that need to be had at work. And our biggest excuse often is time, right? I just don't have time to do this.
Yeah.
And I think of the number of times I've heard that, and I think you would actually save time in the long run because you'd see better outcomes from people. You would feel better about your job. I mean, I think right now we're at a crisis in terms of mental health in the workplace, and people feeling, we have more connections than ever. We have more friends and more contacts than ever, and yet we feel more isolated than ever. And I think this is a big piece of that, of really showing up at work. Our next prompt, because I'm looking at the time, we're getting a little bit close. I mentioned time gets in the way sometimes of conversations. One thing I've noticed is that, and Jane and I have had this conversation, I hear from clients all the time that I don't want to bother people. And to me, I'm so saddened by the fact that engaging with another human, learning, sharing, hearing their story is seen as unproductive or an interruption instead of an opportunity. And I think it's really about turning that ship a little bit in terms of direction to point people to the opportunity that exists of doing that. And so, we're seeing here fear, time zones. Fear is a big one. I see that in the clients I work with a lot. There's a high degree of perfectionism. Sometimes tech has given us this illusion that everything can be spit out accurately, perfectly every time. And so we are really attached to that need to prove ourselves. So having a bit of a more growth mentality around this, like I'm going to put myself out there and it might not go perfectly every time, but that's okay because that's how I'm going to get better.
That's okay. I'd like to confess a mistake that I made coming back to the office and working in a hybrid situation. I forgot to build in time for conversations in the office. And one day in particular, I had 11 things to do and 10 hours. And I was heads down, and someone came in my office, and he just wanted to talk about a life change he was experiencing. And it took me a minute to look up and see a human and forget about my 11 things. And we talked for probably a half hour, and it was a marvelous thing. And we talked about his life, we talked about work. I grew so much from that because I realized I was the one who wasn't a phone, it was a computer, but was looking at my phone when he needed to be a human. And so now when I'm going to the office on those days that we go, I don't book myself for 11 things. only about 3 and the time for the people is the value.
Yeah.
And my days are great that way.
We have to turn that around to be the productive thing. I mean,
Yes.
organizations are doing great things around anchor days, around coffee chats. I mean, we saw some of that in the X-Leap. We're seeing some of that in the answers in the prior one here. So I think there are ways to do it, but it takes some intention
Yes.
around doing it. And the part of the trouble about this is that we don't know which conversations are going to be the really meaningful, impactful ones. You just have to have them. And often you may not even realize it in the moment. But I'm sure many of you in the room have had the experience of having a conversation that seemed like a normal, everyday conversation. You maybe shared a bit of career advice or something, and someone will come to you a year later and say, you know, when we had that talk, this really resonated with me, and I made a change as a result of that. And the trajectory that my career took after having the courage to make that change, and I'll think, and I'm like, I don't even remember that conversation. So the reality is you never know what conversations you're having are going to have an impact for others or for yourself. But you just have to kind of increase your surface area, I guess, of luck and put yourself out there to have them.
That was a great point. And that person who came back to you, that was actually an extension of that first conversation, right? You stayed in her success plan, or his, and the conversation's probably not over, Sandra.
Yeah. And so I think it's really important from that perspective. So lots of stuff gets in the way, but we really need to remain focused on the objective. We all know how we feel when we have good conversations, so holding that feeling and striving toward that. So we'd love to hear one thing from you. What's something you think you can do differently? Not a list of 20 things that you have to do when you get back to the office, but what's just one action that you could do slightly differently to increase the number of conversations that you can have?
We want to learn from you. Remember, learning was one of the big words that came up in the first Mentimeter question. Can we print this out or something?
Yeah, we're going to make this available
Okay.
after, because I think there's a lot in here that is hard to take in all at once. I loved one of these which said, ask a question. And that's, I don't know who said that, but I love leading with a question instead of a judgment. It's one of the things that I see happening in the workplace a lot is we're very, very quick to categorize because things have to move quickly. Sometimes it's about slowing down a touch to ask a question to make sure you've understood the other person. And sometimes I'll go even a bit further than that to say it's the second question that matters.
Yes.
So the first question, how are you?
Fine.
Fine. Yeah, fine.
Fine.
So really the value is the second question.
How are you really?
You know what? I got a lot
How are
going
you
on
really?
today.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think people who make that investment in the second or third question are more likely to draw people out to say, this is safe. This is okay. This person actually wants to know what's going on for me, or they wouldn't have asked the second question. But the first question kind of feels a bit performative. But the idea of asking questions is such a powerful, powerful tool to be able to encourage a conversation to happen. Prioritize people over tasks, reprioritize meetings. Now, some people are going to say, oh no, please don't reprioritize me. We don't need more meetings. But what we need are different meetings, right? Whether we rethink how they work in an organization, as I mentioned, with breaks, with the person before the content, with better structure, with more using some of these asynchronous things to make the meeting more effective, to make sure people know why they're at the meeting instead of, just being there to be distracted.
Yes, and I think we're almost at our time, but there's something that I wanted to say to you, and it's related to how sometimes tech norms and protocols can work into just your in-person norms and protocols. And I really like to use the hashtag #YouMatterToMe in an email. I've started sending it to personal people and work people. #YouMatterToMe.
Oh, I love that. And you matter to me.
You matter to us.
One of the things that I think is fascinating about that, it makes me think of another example of, like you mentioned, the hearts. You mentioned there are ways that tech can deliver some of that a little, but we need to be intentional about it. So you mattered to me too.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, you know, there are a couple of things I want to say just before you leave the stage and we move on. But you mentioned Nancy Dixon, and I was really hoping that she would be here for the conversations. And she said to me, this will be the first KM World that I have not been able to come to. So we miss her. But I want you, if you haven't followed her blog, she talks about conversations a lot. So you can certainly follow up on this theme. But I'm really pleased that, you know, we had this conversation and that we are looking at, you know, the human side, because KM is about people, our culture, how we relate, how we share that information. It's, you know, the bottom line. And yes, you know, we're looking at the technology and how it can help us. But we, you know, we need to talk about both of those sides. So I really thank both of you for this wonderful conversation. And thank you for participating. That was great information. Thank you. Thanks, ladies.